The night my mother-in-law died, I swear I heard her coughing outside our baby's window, even though she was already lying cold in a hospital bed across town. And ever since then, the smell of her cigarette smoke keeps returning, drifting through rooms she never walked in again. I've never told anyone this, but if you're still here, then I need you to listen. And I hope you're ready, because what happened to us didn't end with her death. It only began. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. All right, let me take you back. This happened 3 years ago, in a small town outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I was 35 then, new mother, still learning how to breathe again after my daughter was born. My husband, Mark, was doing everything he could to keep us afloat financially, working late shifts that left me alone more often than not. And my mother-in-law, Diane, well, she had a complicated way of loving people. She smoked constantly, the kind of smoking that sunk into her hair, her sweaters, the cushions of her car. She never meant harm, I know that. She grew up in a house where half the adults lived with cigarettes between their fingers. But once our daughter arrived, I couldn't ignore the fear twisting inside me every time she lit up near the baby. One afternoon, after weeks of biting my tongue, I finally said it. Diane, please don't smoke near her. It was supposed to be gentle. It came out sharper than I intended. She didn't yell. She didn't crack a joke. She just looked at me like I had slapped her. And later that night, she was gone. A sudden heart attack. No warning. No time to say sorry. No chance to explain that I didn't mean to shame her. I just wanted to keep my baby safe. I thought the guilt would fade. People told me it wasn't my fault, that these things happen, that stress doesn't kill someone in a handful of hours. But guilt doesn't listen to reason. It grows its own roots. And within days of her funeral, the smoke started. It wasn't every night. Not at first. Sometimes it was just a faint trail, like someone had walked through the hallway with a cigarette cupped in their hand. Other times it was so strong I'd check the stove, the outlets, the laundry room, convinced something was burning. Mark never smelled it. Our daughter would stir in her crib whenever it happened, like she sensed something before I did. And I tried to dismiss it, to blame neighbors, drafts, imagination. But deep down, I felt it. That smoke wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from her. A week after the funeral, the first truly impossible thing happened. I was rocking the baby in the living room, half asleep, half aware, when I heard a cough from the hallway. A very specific cough, the dry, stubborn rasp I had heard from Diane 1,000 times. At first I froze. Then I whispered, Diane. Not because I believed she was there, but because some part of me wished she were. Some broken, ashamed part of me wanted one more chance. Another cough answered me. I stood up so quickly the rocking chair slammed into the wall. My daughter whimpered, confused by the sudden movement. And then the smell hit. Fresh, warm, unmistakable. Cigarette smoke. Thick enough that I could almost see it. I should have run. I should have called someone. But instead I stepped into the hallway like I was walking into a memory I didn't ask for. No one was there. But the air trembled with heat, the way it used to when she smoked right next to an open window. I swear, I felt someone pass behind me. A shift in the air pressure. A whisper of fabric. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the smell vanished. I stood there shaking, holding my daughter tight, telling myself I was exhausted, grieving, delirious. But I knew better. Something had followed us home from the funeral. Something that carried the same smoke, the same cough, the same unsettled presence Diane had left behind. And that was only the beginning. Because the next night, the smoke didn't come from the hallway. It came from the nursery. Before all of this, before the smoke, before the coughing, before I started questioning my own sanity, our life was normal. Or at least, the closest thing to normal a new mother can hope for. Mark and I had been married for 6 years. Steady years. Predictable years. The kind of marriage where you know exactly which floorboard creaks when he walks in from work and which stupid sitcom joke will make him laugh before it even lands. We'd wanted a baby for a long time, but when she finally arrived, our daughter, Emily, it felt like the ground shifted under my feet. I loved her instantly, fiercely, almost painfully. But I also felt something I didn't tell anyone. Small. Fragile. Like motherhood had cracked something in me I didn't know how to repair. Every sound startled me. Every quiet moment felt like a test. Every time Emily's tiny chest rose and fell, I stared too long just to make sure it didn't stop. Mark tried to help. He really did. But he was working double shifts to cover medical bills. That meant it was just me and Emily most nights, navigating the long hours that stretch between feedings and diaper changes and the strange, drifting loneliness that comes when the world continues outside your windows and you're stuck in the same room, rocking in the same chair. That was the version of me Diane stepped into, a new mother running on fumes and raw nerves. Diane was intense, even in the best moments. A woman who seemed to carry history in her shoulders, pride in her spine, and cigarettes always between two fingers. She loved hard, but in a way that overwhelmed you. She would drop by unannounced, rearrange my kitchen cabinets without asking, rock Emily a little too fast, feed her a little too much, talk a little too loud. But she showed up. She loved my daughter. And even when she irritated me, I knew her intentions were good. Still, the smoking. I had grown up in a house where no one smoked. The idea of secondhand smoke near an infant kept me awake for nights. I'd mentioned it gently to her before, so gently she brushed it off with a laugh. "It's just a little smoke," she said once. "You're acting like I'm waving a blowtorch around." It became easier to stay quiet. Until that afternoon. Until I snapped. But I'll get to that. For now, I need to explain something about the weeks leading up to her death. I had this uneasy feeling around the house long before the supernatural part began. A strange heaviness, as if the air itself was waiting for something. I told myself it was postpartum emotions, hormones twisting my sense of reality. Maybe it was. But sometimes, late at night, when Emily was finally asleep and I was washing bottles at the sink, I felt like someone was standing just behind me, close enough that I could feel warmth against my neck. Every time I turned around, nothing was there. One evening, about a month after Emily was born, I thought I heard whispering on the baby monitor. Soft, fragmented, almost like someone humming an old melody out of tune. I remember walking into the nursery slowly, deliberately, breath caught in my chest. Emily was sleeping soundly. The room felt normal. But as I backed out, a cold breeze brushed past me, even though the windows were shut. I convinced myself it was the air conditioning kicking on. The day I told Diane not to smoke near my daughter, she came over holding a casserole in one hand and a lit cigarette in the other. I was already exhausted, overwhelmed, irritated by the smell drifting into the living room. And before my brain caught up with my mouth, I said it. "Diane, can you please put that out? Not around the baby." She froze. Her face didn't twist in anger. It just fell, like I had knocked the wind out of her. She didn't argue. That almost made it worse. She nodded quietly, stepped outside, and didn't come back in for nearly 15 minutes. When she did, her eyes were red. I pretended not to notice. She held Emily one more time that day. She kissed her forehead, whispered something I didn't hear, and left earlier than usual. I didn't know that would be the last time I saw her alive. That night, the house felt unusually still. Emily slept through the entire night, something she had never done before. I should have been grateful, but instead, every calm moment felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. And then came the phone call. Mark's trembling voice. The news that dropped me to my knees. Diane was gone. And in that silence that followed, thick, heavy, unbroken, I felt that same cold breeze again, sliding through the hallway even though the air was still. I didn't know it then, but that tiny breeze was the first real sign. The first warning. The first shift in the world I thought I understood. And soon, it wouldn't just be a feeling. It would become something I couldn't ignore, no matter how desperately I tried. The night after Diane's funeral was the first time I truly felt something was wrong. Mark had fallen asleep on the couch, drained from grief and a long week of arrangements. Emily had been strangely quiet all day, watchful, almost. Babies can't understand loss, but they feel shifts. They feel tension. It settles into them like dust. I put her down around 8, humming the same lullaby I always do, the one I used to hum absent-mindedly while pregnant. She gripped my finger a little longer than usual before letting go. I took it as a sign that she was simply overtired. I wish that had been all. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly, heart pounding, as if someone had whispered right into my ear. Not a word, just the raspy tail end of a cough. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. I lay frozen for a moment, listening to Mark breathe beside me. Another cough, this one closer. My first instinct was denial. Houses make noises. Maybe the air in the vents caught a piece of dust. Maybe the neighbors stepped outside. I tried to breathe slowly, to talk myself back into reality. But then came the smell. Thin, familiar. Cigarette smoke drifting in from the hallway. My entire body went cold. I sat up, holding my breath, desperately searching for a rational reason. Maybe a wiring issue. Maybe a burning appliance. Maybe anything except what it smelled like. Except what it was. I slipped out of bed quietly and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dim, lit only by a sliver of moonlight pushing through the blinds. Nothing looked out of place, but the smell was unmistakable, fresh, warm, exactly like the cigarettes Diane smoked in her car. I stepped forward slowly, one foot, then another. Halfway down the hallway, I heard Emily shift in her crib. Not crying, just stirring, like she sensed someone near her. Then the smoke thickened. It didn't waft. It didn't drift in from one direction. It bloomed, right there, in the middle of the hallway, like someone exhaled a long, steady breath directly into the air in front of me. I backed up, hitting the wall behind me harder than I meant to. Diane. The name escaped me before I could stop it. No answer, just silence, and the faint, settling smell that followed her everywhere. I stayed there for a full minute, frozen in place, until the smoke began to fade. When I could breathe normally again, I forced myself to check the nursery. Emily was asleep, peaceful, unbothered, but the temperature in her room was wrong. The rest of the house was warm, early summer heat, mixed with the stuffiness of grief. But the nursery felt 10 degrees colder. My arms prickled instantly. The window was shut tight. The vent wasn't blowing. It was as if something had passed through the room just moments before. I stood there, gripping the crib rail lightly, staring at my daughter's face. She looked safe, innocent, untouched, but I didn't feel safe, and I certainly didn't feel untouched. When I returned to the hallway, the air had cleared completely. No smoke. No cold, nothing left behind except the echo of my own panic. I crawled back into bed next to Mark, shaking so hard I had to hold my own hands still. He didn't stir. He didn't smell it. He didn't hear a thing. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just exhaustion, lack of sleep, postpartum anxiety mixing with grief. I had enough diagnoses to blame it on, too many, if anything. But denial only works for so long, because the next day, it happened again. This time around 3 p.m., while I was feeding Emily in the rocking chair. A faint cough drifted through the baby monitor, a cough that was impossible to misinterpret. I stopped rocking. My stomach tightened. Another cough, then silence. I checked every corner of the house. Nothing. No smoke, no scent. But when I returned to the living room, the rocking chair was still gently swaying, even though I wasn't sitting in it anymore. I touched the armrest. It was warm, as if someone else had just been sitting there. That night, the temperature in the nursery dropped again, just by a few degrees, but enough that I had to grab a blanket for myself even though the rest of the house was muggy. I wanted to tell Mark. I wanted to say something, anything. But how do you tell a grieving man that you think his mother is lingering? And not peacefully. So I stayed silent. But silence became guilt, and guilt became tension, and that tension grew thicker every day. The signs were small, but constant. A faint tapping on the nursery wall. The baby monitor flickering with static at the exact same minute each night. A cold draft brushing past me whenever I hummed the lullaby Diane liked. A shadow in the hallway that didn't quite move, but didn't quite stay still. Piece by piece, I felt the world bending around me. And somewhere deep inside, I knew. This wasn't grief. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't me slowly unraveling. Something was here. And soon, I wouldn't be able to ignore it at all. I wish I could say the strange moments stayed small. Little bumps in the dark, little hints of something lingering. But grief has a way of sharpening your attention, and whatever was happening in our home, it wasn't fading. It was escalating. It started with the baby monitor. Around 2 a.m. every night. Exactly 2 a.m., the monitor would crackle softly. Not enough to wake Mark, but enough to jolt me upright in bed. At first, it was just static. Then the static thickened, deepened, like someone exhaling directly into the microphone. Then, one night, I heard humming. A broken, breathy hum. A tune I recognized immediately. It was the same lullaby Diane used to hum while pacing our kitchen with Emily cradled against her shoulder. She hummed it constantly, even when it barely resembled a melody. Hearing it come through the monitor at 2 in the morning, my entire body went rigid. I ran to the nursery so fast I nearly slipped. When I pushed open the door, Emily was asleep, but not peacefully. Her tiny fists were balled tight, and her forehead was creased as if she were concentrating or resisting something in a dream. The room was freezing again. Not chilly, freezing, like the air inside had been pushed out and replaced by winter. I stepped farther in, and my breath fogged in front of me. I stared at the crib, afraid to look away. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded. But I felt it, the pressure, the weight of someone sharing the room with me. "Diane," I whispered. "If you're here, why?" Nothing replied, but the rocking chair in the corner shifted ever so slightly, pushing back as if someone had just stood up from it. I backed out of the room without blinking, terrified that if I looked away, I'd see her shape settle into that chair. I told myself I was imagining things. That exhaustion was twisting my senses. But rationality stops working when the same thing happens the next night. And the next. And the next. Always at 2 a.m. Always the same static. Always followed by cold that didn't belong. During the day, the house seemed normal. Sunlight, laundry, dishes, naps. But the signs still crept into the corners. I'd find the curtains in the nursery pulled open even though I always kept them closed during nap time. I'd walk into the hallway and feel heat radiating from one specific spot on the wall, the exact height of Diane's head when she used to lean there while talking to me. Once, I caught a faint outline of a handprint on the glass of the back door, a handprint that didn't match mine or Mark's. Larger, narrower fingers, smudged at the tips, like someone with cold skin had pressed too softly to leave a clear mark. Worse than the physical signs was what began happening to me. My emotions didn't feel like mine anymore. Grief turned into something sharper, something hot, something that twisted guilt into blame. I began second-guessing every choice I'd made around Diane. Every word, every sigh, every moment I didn't thank her enough or sit close enough or let her hold her granddaughter for as long as she wanted. The haunting wasn't just around me. It was inside me. And the deeper the guilt grew, the stronger the activity became. One afternoon, while Emily was napping, I sat on the living room floor folding baby clothes. My mind wandered, back to the moment I told Diane not to smack, back to the look on her face, the quiet pain she tried to swallow. I whispered out loud, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." The air around me shifted instantly. The living room filled with cigarette smoke, fresh, unmistakable, as if someone had blown it directly over my shoulder. The smell disappeared almost as fast as it came, but not before a soft, shaky whisper slipped through the room. "I know." I dropped the clothes. My hands shook uncontrollably. I turned so quickly that my neck cracked. But no one was behind me. I should have called someone. A priest, a medium, anyone who could offer explanations. But I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. Saying it out loud would make it real. So I carried everything alone. And as the days stretched into weeks, the supernatural signs multiplied, stacking on top of each other until I couldn't tell where reality ended and guilt began. Lights flickered when I cried. Cold breezes swept through locked rooms. Objects moved, small things, subtle things. A pacifier shifting on the crib shelf when I wasn't looking. A framed picture of Diane turning slightly toward the nursery by the end of each day. But the worst sign, the one that broke me, happened late one afternoon while I rocked Emily to sleep. I was humming softly when Emily opened her eyes and looked over my shoulder. Not at me, not at the chair, at something behind me. Her mouth stretched into a wide smile. Then she lifted her tiny hand and reached toward the empty space just above my shoulder, like someone she recognized was standing right there. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just held her tighter, rocking faster, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the lullaby anymore. That was my lowest point, when I finally realized this wasn't just grief or imagination or a ghost lingering out of love. Something else was feeding off me, growing stronger, more present, and whatever it wasn't done. Not even close. There comes a moment, after weeks of fear, sleepless nights, and guilt gnawing at your ribs, when something inside you hardens. Not out of bravery, not out of strength, but because you realize you can't keep living the same way. For me, that moment came on a Thursday morning. I had barely slept. The night before, the static had started at 1:59 a.m. instead of exactly 2 a.m., and something about that small shift terrified me more than the previous nights combined. It meant whatever was happening wasn't following a fixed pattern. It was changing, growing, adjusting. That morning, when I walked into the nursery to get Emily, the cold air hit me like I'd stepped outside into winter. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even fussy. She was staring at the far corner of the room, completely still, as if she were watching someone I couldn't see. I felt something snap inside me. Not fear, resolve. I picked her up, pressed her against my chest, and whispered, "This has to stop." Saying it out loud felt like drawing a line in the sand. For the first time since everything began, anger slipped in, thin, trembling anger, born from exhaustion and fear and love tangled together. I wasn't angry at Diane. Not exactly. I was angry at whatever was happening to my daughter. Angry at the helplessness that had swallowed me whole. Angry at myself for letting it go on this long. After breakfast, I did something I had avoided since the funeral. I sat down with a notebook, opened to a blank page, and wrote. What I know so far. It felt ridiculous, like preparing for a presentation about my own haunting. But once I started writing, my hand moved on its own. Smoke smell appears randomly, strongest during emotional moments, activity increases at 2 a.m., nursery becomes freezing, humming through monitor, rocking chair movement. Emily reacts as if someone is near her, possible intelligent responses to my emotions. When I read back the list, my chest tightened. Seeing it all written out made everything real in a way my mind had refused to accept. But it also gave me something else, clarity. I flipped to the next page and wrote, "What I'm going to do." Even writing the words felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of myself. I didn't know if any of it would work. I didn't even know exactly what it was. But planning gave shape to the chaos swirling around me. I listed the steps slowly, methodically. Observe without reacting emotionally. Document every event. Speak directly and calmly if something happens. Set boundaries in the nursery. Cleanse the house, spiritually, symbolically, emotionally. If needed, confront whatever is here. My hand trembled when I wrote that last one. Confront. That word felt too big, too heavy. But for the first time, I didn't feel like running. Something inside me whispered that if this was Diane, if any part of her remained, she needed something. A message. Closure. Forgiveness. Or maybe she needed me to ask for forgiveness. Either way, pretending nothing was happening was no longer an option. Around noon, while Emily napped, I gathered supplies. Not religious items. I wasn't raised in a faith that used holy water or incense. Instead, I leaned into symbolism. I opened windows for the first time in days, letting warm air sweep through the rooms. I lit a simple white candle in the living room. I played soft music, instrumental, calming, the opposite of the tension gripping the house. And then I spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly. If something is here, if you're trying to reach me, I'm listening. But not like this. Not around Emily. You're scaring her. You're scaring me. We need rules. It felt strange, like disciplining the air. But something shifted in the room. A quiet pause, like the house was holding its breath. I kept going. If you're Diane, I'm sorry for how we left things. I'm sorry for what I said. I just wanted to protect her. I didn't mean to hurt you. My throat tightened. I blinked hard. I miss you. Mark misses you. But you can't be here like this. As soon as the words left my mouth, a soft crack sounded from the candle. The flame flickered once, then steadied. For the rest of the day, the house was calm. Softer. The kind of calm that makes you hopeful in a way you're afraid to trust. But as evening approached, dread seeped back into my chest. Because if there's one thing I had learned over those weeks, it was this. Silence didn't mean safety. It meant something was gathering strength. And that night, the static didn't wait until 2 a.m. It started at 11:47 p.m. A full 2 hours early. The humming was louder, clearer, almost recognizable as a voice now. My body stiffened with fear, but underneath it, beneath the shaking, beneath the cold, a calmness settled into my bones. Not acceptance, preparation. I knew then that the time for planning was over. The time for confrontation was coming. And whatever was waiting for me in the nursery, I wasn't running anymore. The night everything broke open didn't creep in slowly. It hit fast, hard, like the house exhaled something it had been holding back for weeks. It started at 11:47 p.m. That hiss of static through the monitor, sharp, electric, violent. I shot up in bed before I was even fully awake. Then came the humming. Not soft anymore, not distant, loud, clear, right next to the microphone. Mark jolted awake beside me. He blinked, confused, then frowned. "You hear that?" he whispered. My heart seized. For the first time, he heard it. Another sound followed. Not humming. Footsteps. Slow, rhythmic. Inside the nursery. I didn't wait for him to move. I flew out of the bed and into the hallway. Cold hit me instantly. Not a draft, a wall of cold, like stepping into a freezer. The nursery door was already cracked open. The humming grew louder, swirling around the doorway, vibrating through the floorboards. Emily cried out once, sharp, confused, then fell silent. Silence terrified me more than the crying. "Emily," I whispered. No answer, just that humming. Broken, familiar, and beneath it, soft coughing. I pushed the door open. Everything inside was wrong. The rocking chair moved in hard, deliberate swings, creaking violently as if someone were rocking with their full body weight. The curtains blew inward even though the window was shut. Toys rattled on the shelf, and the smoke, not faint, not drifting. Dense clouds rolling through the air like someone was standing right there, chain-smoking inside the nursery. My eyes stung instantly, but I didn't back away. Emily lay in her crib, eyes wide, staring at the corner of the room. Not crying, not moving, frozen. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. Not a figure, not a face, not something you could point a finger at. A distortion, like heat rising from pavement. A trembling ripple of air, shaped vaguely like a person standing in the corner. It shifted, tilted, turned toward me. "Diane," I breathed, even though I didn't know anymore if that was true. The distortion pulsed, once, and the rocking chair slammed to a stop. Then everything happened at once. The door behind me slammed shut so hard the walls shook. The lights flickered wildly. Smoke thickened into choking waves. Emily began to cry, screaming, frantic, terrified. I stepped forward. "Stop! Stop this!" A cough answered me from the corner. Deep, wet, painful. Not Diane's. The sound twisted into something harsher, angrier, like it was scraping through a throat that didn't belong. The distortion in the corner stretched, expanding, rising higher than any human should. And the smoke curled toward me in spiraling threads, clawing through the air like hands reaching. Mark banged on the door behind me, shouting my name. I raised my voice, shaking. If you're Diane, you have to listen to me. You can't do this. Not to Emily. The humming stopped abruptly. Silence. For one long second. Then a whisper, low and close, right beside my ear. Not her. I whipped around, but nothing was there. The room cracked with another cough, angrier, closer, coming from the crib. I lunged forward, grabbing Emily just as the mobile above her crib spun so fast the shapes blurred. The cold around the crib was suffocating, sharp enough to make my fingers ache. Smoke surged toward us in a violent wave. I held Emily tight against my chest. My voice broke. Diane, please, if you're here, stop. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean. The distortion jerked violently. The smoke pulled back, paused, like something was listening. Emily hiccuped. Her tiny hand curled into my shirt. I forgive you, I whispered. But you have to let us go. You can't stay like this. You're scaring your granddaughter. You're hurting her. A long, trembling exhale filled the room. Not mine. Not Mark's. Something else. The smoke twisted, then collapsed inward, folding toward the corner. The room warmed by a fraction. The mobile slowed. For a moment, I thought it was over. And then, the distortion surged forward, rushing at me with impossible speed. Smoke blasted into my face, burning my eyes. The lights blew out with a pop. Emily screamed. Mark burst through the door at the same second, breaking it off its hinges, and pulled me backward with all his strength. The smoke exploded outward like a shriek. A single word ripped through the room, raw and ragged. Go! The smoke jerked upward, slammed into the ceiling, and vanished. The temperature snapped back to normal. Silence fell so suddenly I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The rocking chair stilled. The curtains settled. The monitor shut off completely. And the distortion was gone. I clutched Emily, sobbing into her hair. Mark held both of us, shaking, whispering, "It's okay, it's okay, we're okay," even though he didn't believe it. Because we weren't okay. Not even close. Something had been in that room with us. Something that wasn't just grief or guilt or imagination. And whatever it was, it hadn't left peacefully. It had been forced away. And the echo of that final word, G-O, didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a promise that this wasn't over. Not yet. In the days after the confrontation, the house felt hollow. Not peaceful, just empty, like a room after someone storms out and slams the door behind them. The kind of emptiness that vibrates. I barely slept. Mark didn't either, though he tried to pretend. He kept checking locks, replacing bulbs, opening and closing the nursery door as if he expected the temperature to drop again. Neither of us said the word ghost, but it hung between us, heavy as smoke. The morning after everything happened, I told Mark the whole truth. Every sign, every whisper, every cold draft and moving object and humming lullaby. He didn't interrupt. He didn't laugh or question my sanity. He just listened, hands clasped, jaw tight, eyes wet. When I finished, he let out a shaky breath and said something I wasn't prepared for. "I believe you." Those words cracked something inside me. Not pain, relief. Relief so intense it nearly buckled my knees. I hadn't realized how alone I'd felt until that moment. How much the silence had pressed into me, convincing me that fear was something I had to carry without witnesses. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was standing beside me. Really beside me. And that changed everything. We didn't go back into the nursery for 2 days. Emily slept in our room, tucked between us, her tiny breath soft and warm. She didn't stir at odd hours anymore. She didn't stare into corners or smile at invisible shapes. She slept deeply, like something had finally loosened its grip on her. The house stayed warm. Not one cold spot. Not one flicker of lights. Not a trace of smoke. But peace didn't come instantly. It never does. I found myself apologizing out loud when I passed Diane's picture on the hallway shelf. Not because I thought she could hear me, not because I felt obligated, but because guilt doesn't just dissolve when the haunting stops. It clings, it lingers, it demands to be sorted through, piece by piece. Mark and I talked about Diane in a way we never had before. About the kind of mother she was, the kind of grandmother she wanted to be, the life she lived before we knew her, the quiet ways she tried to help us, the loud ways she pushed herself into our lives, and the way I spoke to her that last day. I didn't mean to hurt her, I whispered one night as I rocked Emily. I just didn't want the smoke near the baby. That's all. Mark rested his hands on my shoulders. She knows that. She always knew. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. But whatever remained of her in our home, it wasn't fully her. I believe that now. I believe the haunting twisted a part of her memory into something sharp and restless. Grief can do that. Fear can do that. Maybe spirits can, too. It took time to rebuild normalcy, but eventually I walked into the nursery again. The air felt still, not icy, not heavy. I stood there with Emily in my arms, letting her look around. She cooed softly, grabbed my necklace, then rested her head on my shoulder. Nothing stirred, nothing whispered, nothing moved. I opened the curtains fully for the first time since she was born. Sunlight spilled across the crib, the toys, the rocking chair. It washed the room in warmth, and for a moment I let myself believe that warmth was ours again. We repainted the nursery a soft yellow a few weeks later. Not to cover anything, just to reclaim the space. To remind myself that a room is only haunted if you let it stay that way. Mark fixed the bedroom door he broke. He apologized for the damage, but not for breaking it. He said he'd break it again 100 times if it meant getting to Emily faster. We also took down the baby monitor, the same one that had carried the humming at 2 a.m. Not because we were scared of it, because we didn't need constant watching anymore. I trusted myself more, trusted the quiet, trusted that whatever had lingered was truly gone. At least, mostly gone. There are still moments, quiet ones, when I catch the faintest trace of something familiar. Not smoke, not cold, something softer, a pressure in the room, a warmth behind me, a flicker in the corner of my eye when I'm rocking Emily and humming. But it doesn't feel like a presence, not in the way it did before. It feels like memory, like the last sigh of grief passing through the house. A reminder, not a warning. And I've learned to accept it.to breathe with it, to let it settle, to let it go. Because Diane loved her granddaughter, even through her mistakes, even beyond her last breath. And maybe, for a moment, she just didn't know how to leave. Life moved forward. It always does, even after nights that break you. Emily grew. I healed, slowly, the way a long bruise fades until you forget where it first hurt. And though the house stayed quiet, I carried everything that happened inside me, every sound, every fear, every whisper of something that felt like both love and warning. I still don't know exactly what we confronted that night. If it was Diane, if it was my guilt made visible, if grief can bend the world thin enough for something else to slip through. But I know this, the haunting ended, and the real healing began after, even if the echoes will always remain. I've replayed that period of my life more times than I can count. Not because I enjoy revisiting it, God, no, but because it changed me in ways I'm still coming to understand. For a long time afterward, I kept searching for a clear explanation, something that would neatly tie everything together. A rule, a belief system, a psychological checklist that would tell me, here's what you experienced, here's why it happened, here's how to label it. But nothing ever fit. Was it Diane? Was it the weight of unspoken apologies? Was it postpartum fear shaping itself into something physical? Or was it something else entirely, something that used my memories and emotions to draw strength? I don't know, and I've stopped pretending I do. What I do know is this: grief doesn't leave cleanly. It doesn't slip out the door the moment you accept a loss. It lingers. It settles into corners. It hides in the pauses between breaths. And sometimes, if you're vulnerable enough, if you're tired enough, if you're hurting in ways you don't fully see, that grief takes shape. It becomes something you feel in the walls, the air, the dark spaces of your home. But that doesn't mean you're cursed. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you cared. It means you're human. It means the loss carves something deep inside you, and healing takes time. Even now, years later, I still have moments when I look at the nursery door and feel a faint echo of the cold that once seeped through it. Moments when Emily laughs at nothing, and I wonder if Diane would have laughed at the same thing. Moments when I smell cigarette smoke outside in the open air and it hits me in the chest a little harder than it should. But the house remains peaceful. Not perfect. No home ever is. Just peaceful. Sometimes at night, when I'm rocking Emily, now older, now able to wrap her arms around my neck, I catch myself humming the lullaby Diane used to hum. Not out of fear, not out of habit, but because it reminds me that love, even in its messiest forms, leaves an imprint. And because forgiveness, once given, doesn't vanish. It reshapes everything it touches. A few months after the haunting ended, I visited Diane's grave alone. I brought flowers she always liked, white lilies, and placed them gently at the base of her headstone. I stood there for a long time, not speaking, not crying, just breathing, just letting the quiet settle in. When I finally did speak, my voice was calm. I'm sorry for how things ended, and I hope you know, I loved you, even when I didn't show it well. A breeze moved through the cemetery then, warm, soft, familiar, not cold, not heavy, not unnatural, just a breeze. And I took that as the closest thing to an answer I would ever get. If there's one thing I learned, one truth that stayed with me long after the shadows faded, it's this. Unresolved love can turn into fear if you don't face it. And facing it doesn't always mean understanding it. Sometimes it just means acknowledging it, letting it breathe, and then letting it go. I don't think Diane meant to hurt us. Not in life. Not afterward. I think something in her, or in me, held on too tightly. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe out of longing. Maybe out of fear of being forgotten. But love isn't meant to hold you hostage. It's meant to guide you, soften you, push you forward. So if you've lost someone, if your home feels heavier than it should, or your chest feels tight with things you never said, please hear this. Forgiveness doesn't require the other person to be standing in front of you. Forgiveness is something you offer so you can breathe again. And healing doesn't always feel like a victory. Sometimes it just feels like a quiet morning after a long night, when the air finally warms and you realize the house isn't watching you anymore. I still carry Diane with me, but not the smoke, not the cold, not the fear, just the love she had for her granddaughter, and the complicated love she had for me. That's what remains. That's enough. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels.